Hi guys, welcome to my channel. I hope you're all well and looking forward to doing another watercolour painting with me. Today I'm putting the trip to Italy book to one side to try out this one, the Mix and Draw Travel Sketchbook to Venice. Now this is going to be a bit of a challenge as there are no step-by-step instructions. Am I ready for it? Probably not. Am I going to try it anyway? Absolutely. So let's do this. So, this sketchbook I received a while back as a very kind gift from Inspiria.com to test out and review. This watercolour painting book is a bit different in that it's designed more as a travel sketchbook, so it comes with this handy water brush, which once filled with water means you don't need to take additional water or containers out with you. Now, if you've seen any of my previous videos where I've flipped through the sketchbook, you'll know that, unlike the Italy book as I mentioned, it doesn't have the step-by-step instructions. But inside the front cover you do get an introductory explanation of what it's all about, a bit about the author, Vitaly Detz, and 7 careful steps to make sure you get the most out of your painting experience. So today I'm going to share with you my first impressions, as despite me receiving this painting book as a gift to review, this video is not sponsored, so I'll be giving you my honest opinions. Now, whether the lack of instructions is an advantage or a disadvantage remains to be seen, and I'll talk more about that later on, but this book does still have the outline sketches for each of the 10 pictures, and of course the paint, which is actually dried onto the paper. This I think not only looks amazing but is a genius idea, and I'm really looking forward to trying it out. In the back of the book, in a neat envelope, are these reference photos for each of the paintings, or if you prefer you can find the exact place using the QR code which is painted above each of the outline sketches. These paintings don't appear to be in any particular order, so I just picked one that appealed to me the most. I chose a photo reference that both inspired me and looked fairly straightforward compared to some of the perhaps more intricate and detailed photos. This one also appealed to me because of the reflections on the water and of course the gondola, which is what I think of when I think of Venice. You can see the outline sketch isn't too detailed but does give us a good place to start. Before I leapt into this though, I wanted to quickly test out the paint page, so grabbed my watercolour sketchbook to swatch out a few colours. Now this palette is made up of a special material which doesn't absorb water, and the paints themselves are professional watercolour paints by Royal Talens. They were really easy to activate just using the water brush, and I absolutely loved the range of colours and the way they're laid out on the page or palette. I tried to use the reference photo when swatching out the paints to see what colours I might use for different areas of the painting. With that all done, I taped around my sketch to both protect the pages underneath and to give a nice clean edge to the finished piece. Then I was all ready to begin. I'm going to keep the reference photo to the left of my paper so you can see what I'm working from, and I'll also keep the paint palette in frame too so you can see what colours I choose for what areas. I began by pre-wetting the area for the sky to get a nice even wash. Now the advantage to this painting book is that all the colours have been pre-picked and printed on the palette, so we haven't got to waste time picking colours or mixing them up. It's as easy as just picking them off the palette and applying it to your paper. With the sky done, I thought I'd lay down some light layers of colour all over the painting first to both get a feel for it and to begin mapping out areas of light and dark. Details can come later. So for the buildings I used a very light layer of yellow-orange, and whilst the paper was wet, added in a few more orange tones so that they could bleed together on the paper, as I really like this look. Straight away I started to enjoy this painting and didn't feel restricted by step-by-step instructions. I was really enjoying it, it was a lot of fun, and you had a little bit more flexibility with the method that you were using as well. For the pillar on the left hand side of the painting I used the same yellow tones, but thought I'd drop in some of the purple hues as well just to give a bit more shadow. As much as I didn't plan on adding too many details at this stage, I did want to just map out and indicate just some of that brickwork on the left hand side before adding details later on. For the next building, I used the same sort of method, using a very light wash of a more greeny tone and then bleeding in some of those darker colours for the bottom half of the building. I think using the water brush for this part of the painting as opposed to a regular paintbrush really helped to keep the paper wet and helped all those colours bleed together nicely. When it came to painting the building on the far right hand side, as I'm doing now, I decided to pre-wet the whole area and apply an even wash. I didn't go round the windows this time because there weren't any lighter areas, and I thought that I could just apply a darker colour to them later on. This was a technique that I think I've picked up from the watercolour trip to Italy painting book, as prior to doing that I would automatically have painted around all the windows. So it's really nice to be able to put something I've learnt from previously into practice today. So far as the colour choice for the inside and the darkest parts of the windows, I went for a mixture of the blue and purple at the top of the painting palette. And with that done, it was time to move on to the water. Again, I decided to pre-wet this area and then, to try and get a smooth even wash, drop colours in from the green section. For this area I did use my watercolour sketchbook just to test out some of those colours prior to applying them to the paper. This area of the painting was one that I was really looking forward to, although I did know it was going to be a bit of a challenge as I'm not too practiced with drawing water. I thought I'd lay down a base layer of light colour to start with and then build on those after looking at the reference picture. In the reference picture I noticed that the areas of water nearest the buildings weren't actually green and were more orange and brown in colour, where they reflected the colour of the buildings. The areas of water nearest the front of the painting, however, were a lot darker in colour, and I was looking forward to putting in some of those darker reflections from the gondola. With the first light layer of colour down on the water, I then moved my attentions back to the roofs and started to build up darker values using the more orangey brown tones from the top of the palette. Now, initially I had been a little bit sceptical about how rich or saturated you could get these colours, especially using a water brush, but as you can see I did manage to get some really nice dark values for the shadow areas underneath the roof. Next I moved on to the area of greenery on the left hand side of the painting, and for this used the area of the palette that was a cross between more yellow ochre and viridian to create a really nice olive green or sap green colour. I then dropped in some darker values from further down the palette to create some shadow areas within that green. I used more of a stippling motion with my brush to try and get the effect of leaves, and I was really pleased with how that turned out. When it came to picking the colours for the windows on the lighter, brighter buildings, I went for some green tones. But to be honest, I didn't really spend an awful lot of time thinking these things through, so I would say the style of painting was far more instinctive without the step-by-step instructions, and it was really relaxing and enjoyable. And when it came to painting the shrub on the side of this building, I instinctively went for more purples rather than dark greens, and I really thought this gave it a bit more interest. With that done, I thought it was time to start adding some darker value and contrast to the piece, so I added some shadows to the area under the roofs and started to add in a little bit more detail as well. For the person steering the gondola, I went for orangey brown shades for his head and arms, before then adding in some really dark values for his trousers. Now I think if I was doing this without the paint palette, I might have been tempted to have mixed up more of a black shade, but with only the palette to use, we were limited to the darkest colour on it, which was more of a dark green. I like how this added a lot of contrast to the painting, but still kept it nice and cohesive. I then went for a slightly lighter shade for the gondola itself. Now for the inside of the gondola, I couldn't really make out what was being carried, but I could see a faint outline of a person, so I just went in and tried to match up some of the colours without getting too bogged down with the details. Then it was time to add those red stripes to his shirt and darken up some of the shadow areas on his arms and head. So with that done and dry, I then thought I'd add in some more colour and shading to the buildings themselves. With the darkest areas in place with the gondolier's trousers, it was easier to see what needed to be adjusted on the rest of the painting. For the building on the right, I used darker purples to fill in the darkest shadow areas of the windows. And whilst adding more value and contrast, I also started to build in more detail. Now, I didn't sit and think long and hard about the colour choices. As I said before, this painting was very much more instinctive. So it was nice to just be able to pick colours and choose them according to what you felt at the time and what looked right as you laid them down on the paper. Now, I haven't talked much about any disadvantage to this painting palette or to the content of this book at all. But the only thing that I did have my reservations about at the beginning was the palette itself and how the paint would lay on it and whether or not it would be a messy experience. And to be honest, the palette was good. I didn't have any issues at all to start with. The paint stayed exactly where I put it and it didn't run or bleed into each other unless I added more water and wanted it to, that is. But as I got through the painting and I started to add more water and I started to use more of the palette, I did begin to notice that my hand kept getting in the paint. Now, this isn't a huge problem and I could easily have got round it by removing the page from the painting book or switching over the paint palette so that it was on the other side. But to me, the whole point of having a travel sketchbook is being able to keep it all together. But it's still an option if you're not worried about that. But for me, now I'm aware of it, I'll probably just try to be more careful next time rather than separating out the pages. Now, so far as any other disadvantages with this painting book, well, I couldn't really find any. The only thing that I was really concerned at in the beginning was how the paint was going to react and lay down on the paper, but also the lack of instructions did worry me a little bit because for someone who's not an expert, I wasn't really 100% sure where to start and I was a little bit scared about getting it wrong. But in the absence of any step-by-step instructions, I felt a lot more relaxed. I felt that I was painting a lot more instinctively and there was nothing to compare it with to make out whether it was right or wrong anyway. So it was my take on it and I really enjoyed the whole process. There was no stress, there was no pressure, and so it was just an enjoyable process, and that's what painting should be all about. So I am definitely going to be doing another one of these painting pictures in this book because whether or not I've got the skill level required to make it a masterpiece, I still think that I've got a lot that I can take out from it and a lot that I can still learn through practice. And the good thing about this painting book is that not only have you got the 10 pictures that come with this kit, but within the sketchbook there are also blank pages as well as spare paint pages for you to try out your own paintings. And there was still plenty of paint left on this page once I'd finished the painting. I do really love the way the paint is laid out on the paper as well, and I love the fact that you haven't got to pre-mix them and that the colours you see are pretty much how they lay down on paper, compared to say working with pans where often the colour that lays down on the paper can be very different to how they appear in the pan. I thought the quality of the paints that came on this paint palette were really good, and I was actually really surprised. I didn't expect them to be nearly as bright, luminous or saturated as they actually came out on paper. So all in all, I really loved this travel sketchbook, from the quality of the paints and watercolour paper to the overall nice feel and beautiful presentation of the kit. It really is fun, different and exciting, so if you fancy trying it out, then I'll leave links in the description box below. So far as my painting goes, I spent about 2 hours in total having fun with layering different colours to get the right values and contrast. And though it's not perfect, I'm pretty pleased with how it turned out as a first attempt in this book. Now, if I were to have a second attempt at this painting though, like we did in the Italy book, I might add some darker values to the canal in the foreground, and the windows on the left hand side of the painting at the back do lack detail. But that said, sometimes less detail can be more appealing and interesting, and that's something I'm trying to balance in my artwork. So let me know in the comments what you think of this painting, how you think it turned out, and what you'd like to see next week as well. Would you like to see me do another painting in this sketchbook, or would you prefer me going back to the watercolour trip to Italy book? Or even trying out the France painting book, which I did receive at the same time as this one. That one does have more detailed instructions, so I'd love to know what your thoughts are. Do let me know in the comments. And if you don't want to see any of these, then by all means pop a different suggestion in the comments box if you've got another idea of what you'd like me to paint or draw next time. So I've finished this painting now just by adding a few last glazes, using a really thin wash of paint just to darken up and overall change the colours, particularly on the buildings on the right hand side. With that though, this painting was complete, and all that was left to do was to let it dry and put the bookmark that came in the kit in between those two pages to protect the paint from transferring over. So anyway guys, I'd like to thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you've enjoyed it. Please give it a thumbs up, comment and subscribe to my channel if you're new around here. And here's some more videos that you might like to catch up on that you may have missed from the Italy painting book. Have a great week. I'll see you soon. Bye.